Good evening, everyone. My name is Devanshi Patel, and I'm the chair for the Alternative Dispute Resolution subgroup. And members of this subgroup are Acting Chief Andy Penn, Commonwealth Attorney Tafty, and Elizabeth Valderrama from OAR. The focus of this subgroup is to identify alternative strategies to traditional policing and criminal justice practices. So we will evaluate modalities like mediation and restorative justice in particular, and other potential strategies used in other jurisdictions. The subgroup will look to provide recommendations on alternative practices that may be considered in Arlington.
There's some real interest coming in on from members of the community about restorative justice, and I was wondering if you can share what you've learned so far about restorative justice, the process, and other tools you might be exploring.
Thanks, Bryna. So we are really fortunate in Arlington in that, the county manager has convened a working group called Restorative Arlington that's looking to create a strategic plan for restorative justice. And for people who don't know, restorative justice is a practice that aims to reestablish the balance that's been offset as a result of a crime by involving all of the key stakeholders, so the person who's committed the harm, the person who's been harmed, and any affected community members in the decision-making process as to how best to restore that harm. Restorative practice and restorative justice is not a new concept, and fortunately, it's actually not a new concept here in Arlington. There are stakeholders here that are utilizing the practice. So the ADR subgroup is going to be further evaluating restorative practice and other alternative practices that are used throughout the country, including mediation. And we'll be exploring other opportunities and other again, modalities techniques that will allow us to consider whether there are other options other than bringing matters into the criminal justice system or even the civil system.
Just for those not familiar with the term restorative justice, what is it exactly?
Yeah, so restorative justice it's a theoretical framework that looks to address really three questions. What is the harm that has been committed? What was the impact of that harm, and how do we restore or restore that harm? Bring the relationship back into balance. It's a restorative by nature. It's not punitive, which is what our current practice, our current traditional criminal justice system implements more of a punitive practice. So restorative practices is based on indigenous and native practices throughout the world, and it looks to balancing relationships versus retribution. It's used when the person who has committed harm admits that there is in fact some wrongdoing. So if a person does not admit that they've committed any kind of offense, then that particular case would not be one that is appropriate for restorative justice. Again, restorative justice aims to repair relationships. So when you have a person who has committed an offense against another person, the goal of restorative justice is to repair the harm and restore that relationship. In our typical kind of traditional criminal justice system, it's retributive in the sense that the person who's committed a harm, the sanction is one that's imposed by the state. And so there's no balance to that relationship. There's no restoration of balance to that relationship. Ultimately, what ends up happening is, if there's an offense, there's the sanction for that offense, and there may not be any accountability on the part of the person who has committed the offense, and there may be no direct involvement by the person who has been harmed as a result of that offense. So what restorative justice looks to do is it looks to balance that situation by allowing the people who are involved and all of the stakeholders to come together and ultimately repair the harm that's been done. In many ways, it's more forward-looking than our current traditional criminal justice system. The criminal justice system looks at what happened in the past. It looks at the offense and ultimately decides what sanction needs to be imposed for that prior act. The restorative system looks at that prior act, but looks at it in a forward, in a perspective way, in the sense that it's ultimately looking to repair the harm moving forward so that the victim and the offender are able to restore their positioning in the community.
And Allison, I know you have some direct experience, and maybe you could give some very concrete example, maybe. And thank you.
Sure. We can take the example of a criminal case that's already in court. There may be a situation where there is a criminal defendant who admits that he or she has done something wrong, and also a victim who was the person who experienced the harm. And the parties in the cases, whether really anyone could make the referral to the Restorative Justice organization that's going to be doing mediation of the situation. The attorneys can make the referral. I think even a judge can make the referral. The police, anyone can say, this is a case where we think there is some relationship repair that could happen. And what would happen is if the parties agree, it would require both the harmer or the criminal defendant and the victim, the person who is harmed, to voluntarily agree to engage in this process. And once that happens, it goes to a trained mediator, and that person will meet with the individuals alone for a long period of time, really to understand the two different perspectives and what the person, most likely the victim, is looking to get out of the situation. They may say their goal is to understand why it happened or to prevent it from happening to anyone else again. There could be very, very specific goals or just general ones. And then the goal of the restorative practice is that the people who are the trained counselors or mediators, if you will, having met with both sides individually, ultimately, once they've prepared them to meet themselves, they may meet in person and have what would hopefully be sort of a therapeutic session where there is an acknowledgement by the person who caused the harm of the harm that was caused and the direct impact that it had on an actual individual. And then hopefully there would be something restorative about it for the person who suffered the harm, and maybe some understanding about how it happened. Perhaps in some situations, someone may have personalized something and, it wasn't personal at all. And so the goal is based on evidence. Recidivism, or the individual's likelihood to commit something in the future, goes down when they see the direct impact of a harm that they've caused and the effect that it had on a specific person. And the goal is that that itself decreases recidivism in the future in a way that traditional methods of punishment do not. And there's different ways cases like this can get referred to the system. You could have something as simple as, someone who's under 18, a juvenile, doing something petty to someone, on public transportation, and the adult says, this was silly, but it was still really offensive. And so the two come together where the person really has to face the consequences of what they've done and how it actually hurt someone else. So I hope that is helpful to people, and I'm happy to follow up too.
So Brian, so let me just chime in here with Allison. So, and she's absolutely right. The process in and of itself is not easy. And oftentimes what people mistake for restorative justice is that it's this, get out of jail free card. It's an easier process. But taking accountability and going through the actual process of taking accountability is quite difficult. The community building, the work that's done individually with each person and community member takes time. So these processes often take, 6 to 9 months in terms of being able to get to a place where we're able to restore that harm, or we're able to work to a place where the relationship is again balanced. Restorative justice, though, is not limited to cases that are inside the criminal justice system. And quite frankly, there are a lot of opportunities for us to be using restorative justice as a true diversion opportunity. There are programs, community-based programs throughout the country that are used to provide true diversion for individuals to refer to a community-based program, a particular matter, and then allow that organization to be able to bring the individuals involved in a particular situation together to be able to rectify the harm that was caused. Ultimately, the true difference, I think the fundamental difference between the current criminal justice system and a restorative system is the agency that's given to the person who has committed the harm and allowing them to be able to take accountability for that harm, which is one in which our traditional criminal justice system isn't really set up to allow that to happen. And also for the person who has been harmed to really give agency to their voice and say, this is what I need to be able to restore that harm. And again, our traditional system is just really not set up to allow that type of agency. One of the natural outgrowths of restorative practices is this ability for a person to be able to recognize the harm that they did. And so what has been seen in other jurisdictions that have implemented restorative practice is that there is either a reduction in future offenses or a longer time in which another offense has occurred. So these are practices that we're looking to explore here in Arlington in terms of implementing models that may work for us.